Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we are tackling something a little different, language learning.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And specifically, we're going to kind of get into the head of an English as a second language learner.
Oh, interesting.
So we've got a collection of short stories about Sam, and we're going to kind of follow his journey and
Okay.
see all the different ways that he learns. And I think it's going to be fascinating because we see these like everyday situations,
Yeah.
at the market with friends. He even goes to a museum.
Yeah. And you can see how these become these little learning opportunities, throughout his day.
Absolutely. So that is our mission today, to follow along with Sam as he navigates all these different settings, and not only to see like what he's experiencing, but to understand how his experience can maybe teach us something about effective language learning.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's like extracting those key takeaways
Yeah.
that anyone, no matter what language they're trying to learn, can use.
Exactly. So to kick things off, the first story drops us right into this bustling market with Sam, and he's feeling a little nervous, but he is determined to practice his English.
Right. And that's where the idea of achievable goals comes into play.
Oh, okay.
So he sets this small goal for himself. He just wants to buy some apples,
Okay.
which sounds so simple. But when you're a language learner, even those tiny little interactions,
Yeah.
they feel like these hurdles.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah,
You have to get yourself up to it.
exactly.
So picture him. He's surrounded by these vendors and shoppers, and he has to muster up the courage to ask, "Hello, how much are the apples?"
Yeah. And even just that simple question is a victory. Like he did it. He
Right.
spoke.
Mm.
So the vendor responds, $1 per apple.
Hmm.
And just like that, Sam has completed his first successful interaction,
Wow.
which is a really nice way to highlight how important it is to just push past that fear.
Right.
Just go for it.
And he's so proud of himself. To celebrate, he buys himself a rose. What I found interesting here is that the story kind of emphasizes this emotional side
Right.
of language learning.
It's not just about the words and the grammar and all that stuff. It's the feeling you get
Yeah.
when you're like, I did it.
Yeah, building that confidence.
Yeah. And that self-efficacy, like, I can do this,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
So yeah, those little wins, asking for directions, ordering food, that's what keeps people motivated.
It's like leveling up in a video game or something.
Exactly.
You get that little dopamine hit.
Exactly. You get that little boost to keep you going.
Okay, so let's move on to Sam's encounter with his friend John,
Okay.
who is from Canada.
Oh, cool.
And what's interesting here is John is also learning English.
So this is where like peer scaffolding comes in.
Okay.
They're both kind of learning and supporting each other.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So they meet at this cafe and they're sharing, their aspirations.
Right.
They want to speak English fluently.
Right.
So they have this shared purpose, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and so they're not just passively practicing.
Right.
They're actively pushing each other.
Exactly.
It reminds me of, have you ever heard of the zone of proximal development?
Yes.
Yeah, that we learn best when we're like right outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
Like challenged just enough.
Right. You need that challenge to grow.
Right, exactly.
And having a learning partner can really do that for you.
Creates that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're at the cafe, and then they decide to continue practicing at the park.
Oh, nice.
And so they're discussing all the things they see around them,
Uh,
the flowers, the fountain, the birds chirping,
right.
all in English. And it just seems like a much more relaxed and enjoyable setting than, say, like a classroom.
Right. It highlights how important it is to have that comfortable learning environment.
Right,
Because when you're less stressed, you can take in new information so much easier.
right. You're not like wound up.
Exactly.
So it's like the difference between cramming for a test
Right.
and like having a casual conversation with a friend.
Exactly. Yeah. Low pressure.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Sam's museum visit
Ooh.
with Maria,
Okay.
his friend from Spain.
Cool.
And they share this common goal. They want to improve their English.
Yeah.
And so they decide, let's go to the museum. And so the museum becomes this backdrop for their language practice.
Yarn.
The story mentions colorful paintings, lifelike sculptures, masks from Africa, pottery from China.
Wow.
I mean, what a visual feast.
And it's a great example of immersion.
Oh,
They're surrounded by art.
right.
And so this gives them so much material for conversations. It goes beyond just learning the vocab. It's about connecting the language to culture and context.
Right. So it's not just like memorizing sculpture from a flashcard.
Right.
You're actually there looking at it and discussing it.
Exactly.
So the learning comes alive.
Right.
because you can tie it to something, you know, tangible.
Mhm.
So as they're discussing their observations and their preferences, they're not just practicing grammar,
Right.
but they're developing this ability to like express themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Finding your voice in a different language,
Yeah.
which can be really empowering.
So one thing that struck me about Sam throughout all these stories is like his dedication to routine.
Yeah. That is a key takeaway.
Yeah.
The story emphasizes his consistent effort.
Yeah.
He wakes up early, makes breakfast, catches the bus.
Right. And he carries around this little notebook
Oh, that's nice.
where he writes down new words that he encounters.
I love that.
Yeah. And it just shows that you don't need these like fancy apps
Right.
or expensive courses to learn a language. Sometimes like simple tools are the most effective.
Yeah.
And it also kind of shows how important active learning is.
Absolutely.
He's not just passively absorbing the information.
Right.
He's actively engaging, writing down words, looking them up, trying to use them in conversations.
Mm.
So he's really taking ownership of his learning journey.
Yeah.
Speaking of engaging experiences, let's talk about Sam's trip to the garden
Ooh, the garden.
with his English class.
Nice.
And so the story paints this picture of fresh air, colorful flowers, birds singing.
That's lovely.
What a sensory experience.
And it's not just confined to the classroom. You know,
Right.
this outdoor setting,
Yes.
it's a great way to connect language to the real world
Yeah.
because they're actually there.
Right. And the teacher prompts them with questions like, what do you see? What
Yeah.
animals do you hear? So it forces them to like use their vocabulary
Mm-hmm.
in real time. And I love that. It's such a great example of how teachers can make it engaging.
Yeah. And it goes beyond rote memorization. You know,
Right.
when you have those multiple senses and it's relevant to their environment, they're way more likely to remember it.
Right. Because it's memorable. It's fun.
Exactly.
And I love that the story ends with Sam feeling this like sense of accomplishment because he's confidently chatting
Oh, that's great.
with Maria
Yeah.
in the garden in English.
It's like a reward,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
for all of that hard work he's put in.
All right. Our final stop in this part of the deep dive is someplace that honestly is often overlooked when it comes to language learning.
What is that?
The library.
We love the library again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the story shows Sam and he's walking into the library and you can just tell he's excited.
Right.
But he's also a little overwhelmed because there are so many books.
Right. Yeah.
But he knows what he's looking for. He's seeking out English learning materials,
Mm.
so he's being proactive.
Yes.
And with the help of the librarian, of course, he finds easy English stories,
Oh, perfect.
which at his level is a perfect place to start. And I love that the story mentions how quiet the library is.
Yeah, it's true.
And this can be incredibly conducive to learning.
Right. So it highlights the importance of like finding the right environment for you.
Right.
For some people, it's a bustling cafe, but others, they need that silence to really focus.
Right. So it's all about knowing yourself
Exactly.
and creating the right environment for you.
Mm.
So he settles into a nice, quiet corner and he dives into a story.
Nice.
He understands it.
Great.
And he learns some new words like lost and find.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Another small victory.
It is. And it reminds us that progress isn't always about these big, huge leaps forward.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's those little baby steps.
Yeah, and that's what keeps you going.
Exactly.
That feeling of like, oh, I get it. I'm understanding.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing to see how Sam's confidence just grows throughout these stories.
Yeah.
Like, think about that market trip. He was so nervous at first,
Right.
but after he buys those apples and the rose,
Yeah.
you can just feel a shift.
Yeah, totally. Like each little win fuels his belief in himself.
Exactly. And then you see that confidence kind of spill over into those interactions with John and Maria.
Right.
They're like, let's do this. You know, they're not afraid to make mistakes.
It reminds me of that saying, you have to be willing to sound silly, to sound good.
Exactly. Yeah.
But let's go back to the museum for a sec. I was really struck by how they use their surroundings to fuel their conversation.
Oh, yeah. Like, they're not just looking at the art.
Right.
They're talking about it.
Right. Discussing the colors, the shapes, even the emotions that it evokes.
It's such a good example of how you can take these real-world experiences and make learning come alive.
Yeah. That's like they turned the museum into a giant textbook.
Exactly.
And speaking of like multi-layered learning, Sam's overall approach is pretty impressive. Like he's not just relying on one method.
Right. He's got all these different things going on.
Right. He's incorporating all these different strategies.
Which keeps it interesting, you know?
Right. And effective.
And effective, yeah. It hits all those different points. Reading, writing, listening, speaking.
It's like he's creating his own little language ecosystem.
He
And
is.
what I appreciate is that he's not overwhelming himself. He's taking these like small, manageable steps and building upon them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it reminds me that we don't need to, like, reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Sometimes the simplest methods are the best.
Right. Consistency is key.
Yeah, just a little bit of creativity
Right.
and a willingness to put yourself out there.
Yeah. And let's not forget the role of positive reinforcement. Like, remember when Sam was practicing English with his classmates in the garden?
Yeah.
He was a little hesitant at first, but his teacher was so encouraging.
Right. And that supportive atmosphere, I think, made a big difference.
Totally. It builds your confidence.
Yeah. And it encourages you to keep going. And
Absolutely.
those aha moments, when it just clicks.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I love how the teacher in the garden is really using the environment to
Yeah.
create this more immersive experience.
She's not just, like, standing there giving a lecture.
Right.
It's about observing, using your senses.
Right.
Or-
Interacting
Yeah,
with nature. It's brilliant.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it taps into that, intrinsic motivation.
Oh, okay.
Like, when you're interested, when you're engaged, you're going to learn better.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be a classroom.
Right.
Sam shows us that. Like
Yeah.
all these everyday experiences, the market, the park, even the library.
It's about keeping your eyes open,
Yeah.
your ears open,
Right.
and being willing to step outside of your comfort zone.
For sure. Now, one thing that really struck me about Sam's story is his resourcefulness.
Oh, yeah.
Like he doesn't have these fancy language learning apps or
Right.
tutors, but he's making the most of what he has available.
Exactly. Like the library.
Yeah.
He just dives right in, finds the right book,
Right.
and spends the time.
Yeah. And you can just tell he's doing it with this sense of wonder
Yeah.
and excitement.
It's an adventure.
Right. Exactly. He's not viewing it as a chore,
Exactly.
which is so important. And that mindset, I feel like, is contagious.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it reminds us that, learning a language is journey.
Yeah.
It's not a race.
Yeah. There will be moments of frustration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when it's slow going. But it's those little victories,
exactly.
those moments when a new word clicks or a conversation flows.
That's what keeps you going.
Right. So we've been focusing a lot on Sam's individual journey,
Right.
but it's also important to consider like the broader context of language learning.
Right.
Like how do language policies, cultural attitudes, even economic factors play a role?
Exactly. Like, how does the fact that he's learning English in an English-speaking country,
Right.
like, how does that affect his experience?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Like, are there advantages? Are there disadvantages?
Totally.
I mean, that raises a whole bunch of questions. Like, what's better, learning in an immersive environment or a more traditional classroom?
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Right.
There's always more to discover.
And, I'm curious to see how Sam's experiences might, like, reflect these broader trends. Like, he's interacting with John from Canada,
Right.
Maria from Spain.
Different backgrounds.
Right. So, like, does that create some kind of shared experience?
Right.
Or are there cultural nuances that
Yeah.
make their journeys unique?
It speaks to the power of language
Yeah.
as this bridge between cultures.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just about the words and the grammar. It's about understanding
Yeah.
different perspectives, different ways of life.
So true.
Yeah.
So Sam's story, it's not just about him learning English. He's building relationships.
Yeah.
He's exploring new places. He's embracing new experiences.
All through this lens of language.
Exactly.
Yeah. And all of these experiences are shaping him.
Yeah.
They're making him more open-minded.
Right. Adaptable,
Yeah.
connected to the world.
Mhm.
So it's not just about linguistic fluency.
Right.
It's about personal growth and cultural enrichment as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah, I agree. It's a reminder that loving a language is so much more
Yeah.
than just textbooks and grammar rules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with Sam's story, but what does this all mean for our listeners?
Well, Sam's journey has some great takeaways for anybody, like anybody who's trying to learn something new.
Right. Yeah, not just languages.
Right.
Like, what's the first thing that jumps out at you?
Real world practice. Like, get out there and use it.
Yes.
Don't get stuck in the books.
Right. Like, even just ordering a coffee.
Yeah. Asking for directions. Those little things, they make a huge difference.
Right. because it reinforces what you've learned,
Exactly. You're not just memorizing, you're actually using it.
And I think finding a learning buddy is so important, too.
Oh, yeah. Someone to practice with.
Right. Someone who understands.
Yeah, someone to celebrate the wins with.
It makes it so much more fun.
It does.
Yeah.
And, don't be afraid to immerse yourself in the culture, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, watch movies.
Go to museums.
Yeah, listen to music. You pick up so much just by being around it.
It's like you're learning without even realizing it.
Right. Yeah. And consistency. That is key.
Yeah.
Even just a little bit every day goes a long way.
Like 15 minutes.
Yeah. Reading, listening, speaking.
Sam was so dedicated to his routine. Like
Yeah.
just that little act of writing down the words in his notebook.
Yeah. Those little things add up.
And let's not forget libraries.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
such a valuable resource.
They are. So many books, often free.
Yeah, you don't need all the fancy apps.
Exactly.
All right, so before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Ooh. Okay.
What is one small step you can take today to kind of incorporate some of these things we've talked about into your own learning?
Maybe dust off that language learning app you haven't used in a while.
Yeah, or call up a friend who speaks the language.
Yeah. Practice a little.
Plan a visit to a local museum.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many possibilities.
So many. And just remember that each step, no matter how tiny, it gets you closer to your goal.
So true. Keep exploring.
Keep discovering, just like Sam.
Exactly. And remember, the journey itself is the reward.
It is.
Happy learning, everyone.